Hello, welcome to my channel. I am going to be reviewing Jill Duggar's book again, Jill Duggar Dillard's book again, Counting the Cost. Finally got it right this time. I keep saying counting on. Really good book, highly recommend it. I will link it below in the description on Amazon. I do get a small commission if you use that link to make the purchase. They also have it on audiobook and it's available at libraries, public libraries. I was going to make a longer video today, but I'm really tired, so I'll have to make a longer one next week. I know someone commented last week and said they wanted longer videos, so I'll try to do that, maybe 15 to 20 minutes. Let me know in the comments how long you want the videos to be. Jill was talking about how guilty she felt about not being able to have more kids because her uterus had ruptured during the birth of her second son. She felt really guilty that she wasn't able to have more children, which is all part of IBLP teaching that like the more children you have, the higher your status is, and the more you've been blessed by God. And Jill talks about how she felt really alone after giving birth because she wasn't able to tell very many people what was going on, especially with her dad. She didn't want her dad to know everything going on with her medically because he was just telling everyone, and she wanted some privacy. Talks about how scared she was about how, you know, they believe that they should trust God with however many children they will have, and she said, you know, I realize that this doesn't mean necessarily that I'm going to have 20 kids. I might just end up with the two that I have, and I should be grateful for that. So I found that interesting. But it is kind of a status thing I have noticed with some people that, oh, the more children you have, the higher your status is, the more respected you are. And you'll find that in different cultures and different religions as well. And actually she and Derek did an interview about that over the week. So I'll link that below. Her husband was working in ministry and he had their only car with him. And then she would try to go over to her siblings at the big house, but she felt very disconnected from them. And she felt like she wasn't on the same playing field as them anymore, and that she didn't feel like she felt like they were living the life she used to, and that she had chosen to move on, which is very, very telling. And she didn't feel like she could speak to anyone, even her sisters, about this because talking about her fear left her face shaken, and she had been warned so many times not to stir up contention amongst the brethren, and she was hardwired not to be critical of her parents to anybody, not to her siblings, not to her pastor, and certainly not to her friends. She says, the thought of doing it nauseated me. So this is how they keep silence. This is how abusers keep silence as well. She said, people were always assuming things about us or itching to be the first to report anything negative. Yeah, I mean, people always sell stories about famous people to the tabloids. She said every interaction with someone outside of her family put her on alert. A few times stories had leaked out about upcoming weddings or relationships, and we'd spend time trying to figure out who had leaked the info. There have been some posts and some videos about this lady named Jill Rodriguez. She's very famous in the online, if you Google her. And she had been invited to, I think it was Ginger's wedding, which is Jill's younger sister, and she leaked the invitations online. Jill says, growing up Duggar had left me paranoid about people. Growing Up Duggar, I think, was the name of one of their books too that she wrote with their sisters. I'll have to. And yeah, and Ginger came out in her last book and said, please don't buy that book. I don't know, I wonder if her cousin Amy though has been selling stories about people, especially about Anna Duggar, because there's some stuff that Amy has posted on Instagram that's very similar to stories that have been published in tabloids, so I always wonder that. So Jill also talks about socializing with other mothers from church and how they'd ask her if she was okay, and she would feel the emotion rising in her chest and she would wind up sobbing, which was terrifying. So Ginger talked about this in her last book as well, and she talked about how being alone and speaking to people was very nerve-wracking because with the Duggars, there's so many siblings that are all together. They go everywhere together. You always had a buddy. So she said, at the time when I needed friendships the most, I realized that I didn't know how to talk to people. So, which is what Ginger said too. Sweet Jilly Muffin had been a gold star kid in the big house, but out in the world without any Duggars around, she was just a hollow, lonely, scared girl. So I know people have talked about that with large families and about how they're kind of like a comfort like the other siblings and other family members are a comfort item for everyone else. And when you get somebody alone, they're very, you know, kind of timid or quiet. So not to compare this, but we have 3 dogs, and we just got a rescue dog several months ago that was a hunting dog. She's used to being in a pack. And I have 2 beagles, so she hangs out with the other beagle quite a bit, snuggles with her, and then the bigger dog, he's not as cuddly. But she will go on walks with them, and she looks to them for where they're going and how they'll guide her and stuff, and she's always checking to see what they're doing, so she can follow. And she'll like gallop and stuff when she runs alongside of them, but I've noticed when I take her out by herself, she's very timid, very scared, crying, very unsure of herself, and just, you know, we don't really get anywhere on the walk. So it's very interesting. It's kind of the same mentality, pack mentality. So Jill talks about on the next page that she was caught in no man's land, and that home, the big house, was where the risk was with her dad, while the strangers were her hope for safety. She said, "I guess I wanted the freedom to follow where we were being called, to a world beyond my family and the way I'd been raised. I just didn't have either the tools or the guide to help me do it and survive." So this is a huge problem with sheltered children, to where they don't have the tools, and many of them don't go to therapy or aren't able to go to therapy. It is expensive. There are some church therapies, pastor-led therapy. Typically it's free if you're a member, but with some people that has done more damage than good, you really have to get a pastor who is also using the correct tools. Many of them unfortunately aren't trained therapists, psychologists, and some people do find comfort from that. Jill says, "The only place I felt like I could relax was church. I cherish Sundays. With a couple thousand other people in attendance, I can feel myself relax as I blur into the crowd." I feel the same exact way. So I grew up in a small church. I forgot to say that at the beginning. So I grew up in a fundamentalist church. It was small. Everybody knew everybody. I mean, half the church was related to each other. They're descended from these old German pioneers that had settled the town. And everybody was, I wouldn't say everybody was in each other's business, but it was very gossipy, and everybody knew everything and was trying to control each other's children and stuff like that. And I don't like attending small churches, and I won't. I like to go to mega churches, and I know mega churches get a bad rap with like Joel Osteen. I like them because I can just come in, I'm anonymous, and I can enjoy the service and everything else. And then the larger churches also have more resources. They have like singles groups, couples groups, and they also have counseling, but it's more so than like some just single pastor who's trying to give you psychological help. They do, a lot of these mega churches do have trained, like actual certified, went to college psychologists. They also have hiking groups. They have like mom groups, single mom groups sometimes, and then they have like free childcare sometimes during these like small group get-togethers, and what is other, like ladies Bible studies, things like that. So the resources are really great there. I've been trying to find a mega church up here to attend. We attended one a while ago and I liked it. There was one I used to attend in Maryland that I absolutely loved, but it's over an hour away and I don't really see myself doing that every Sunday. So she says, okay, church was nothing like the IBLP. There was no Mr. Gothard figure at the center drawing attention to himself. Cult personality, what they call it. There were no model families brought up on the stage to give us a model of perfection to emulate. Don't you love those families? We had a few of those in our church, and yeah, things did not end well for their children. I'll just say that, unfortunately. Weren't prepared for the real world, weren't given the tools, as most sheltered children are not. So when they hit the real world and were exposed to all these things, all these vices, like I've talked about in a previous video, things were not good for these kids. They're all still alive. They had it rough for a while. She says they didn't even use the King James Version of the Bible. I know there's controversy about that, like the New King James. Like there's just all this. They didn't say how important it was that children obey their parents far into adulthood, and they didn't preach that women should wear dresses at all times. Instead, they talked about Jesus, love, and grace. They still talked about God's holiness, justice, and our need for sanctification, but it was different from many of the rules I'd been taught in IBLP. So you'll find that in a lot of these newer churches, more progressive churches, mega churches. Not all mega churches, but they'll talk about like service to the community, just like Jesus did, which goes back to like what the Bible actually teaches and pulls away from a lot of the politicized stuff in faith that has happened for the past few decades. So yeah, you'll find a lot of that in these bigger churches. Like one of my friends, she works for a soup kitchen at her church, and they also provide clothes for the homeless and resources for them. So the church that she attends is genuine about wanting to build communities with young couples and families, and the result was captivating. To people in IBLP, it might have been a worldly church. So there was just a lot of that, and I noticed that when I attended Mars Hill Church, which came off as a progressive and worldly church, but it was actually just repackaged fundamentalism, pretty much. But I will make a video about that someday. They talk about like, oh, these hipsters and their tight jeans and stuff like that. There's a lot of fundamentalist churches who will talk, or legalistic churches that will talk about that. And I remember there was, I don't know if it was James Dobson or who it was, but somebody was complaining about these new churches where the pastor wears a faux hawk and in skinny jeans. They have to try and feminize these guys as an insult or whatever, which is telling as well. It's probably James Dobson. He seems to have an issue with, he seems to be obsessed with masculinity. So, oh, I can't wait to make a video on him and my experience with his teachings and my parents during my childhood. Oh, she says Jim Bob used to call those types of churches, those worldly churches, two-kid churches, like I talked about in my previous video. So she says she started studying people at the church because she was just aware of the contrast between these people at the more modern church and IBLP families, and she said IBLP families tended to dress, speak, and smile the same. Very true with some fundamentalists or legalistic Christians. But in our new church, there's a big range of people and behaviors to observe. Some of the older men might wear ties, but most people dress like they're just heading out to the mall. Yeah, I found that at my church in Seattle too, that people did that. And when I went to church in Maryland, I noticed that as well. I was quite shocked when I attended Mars Hill. I mean, this was like 15 years ago. You could see people in like tube tops and halter tops and like little short shorts in the summer. I was quite shocked. I mean, it's kind of like, okay, come as you are, but also like, this is church. I do know that the worship team stuff, so she talks about that. Worship team, somebody had a nose ring. Drums are a huge issue between like the more legalistic fundamentalist churches and these newer churches. She says, I noticed that no one looked like they were doing this out of rebellion or particularly to draw attention to themselves. I felt out of place, or I felt that I was standing out of the way in my ankle-length skirts and covered shoulders. So she talks about how she discussed with her husband the possibility of wearing pants, and she asked him, do you think it makes guys think bad thoughts? Now, her husband was raised a Christian, of course, but he was public schooled, so his parents were not as restrictive. And she said, I always thought that women wearing pants were a sin, or I was always taught that it is a sin. And then she quoted Deuteronomy 22:5, which has, of course, been used to basically say, the understanding from my understanding is that women should not wear pants and men should not wear skirts or whatever because it's you're cross-dressing, basically. I don't think they call it that anymore. Sorry, I don't know. They used to call it. Anyway, however, she was talking about at the time, or Derek was talking about at the time, he says, well, maybe these days women's skirts are considered clothing, or skirts are considered clothing, but back in that culture, men wear more robes, which were basically skirts, which is very true. Jesus wore, it was like I forget what it's called, but it's like a long dress. They still wear it. Muslim men still wear it. In different cultures, wear long robes and dresses and things like that. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I am almost at 20 minutes. After I was saying I wouldn't, of course we're back here right now. So, I got a green screen I'll use hopefully next week. I just wasn't ready to edit with it yet. I got a collapsible small one. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you next week.